Greetings, everyone. My name is Mark Nutter. I'm the Conservation Programs Director here at New Hampshire Audubon. And I'd first like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that this presentation is streaming to you from our state headquarters in Concord, New Hampshire, which is located within the site of the ancient village of Pennacook in Nadakina, which is the traditional ancestral homeland and waterways of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples past and present. I would like to acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and our ancestors, the Alnambak, or humans, who have stewarded Nadakina throughout the generations for thousands of years. And I also invite you to learn more about the indigenous presence on the land you occupy by visiting the website native-land.ca. Here you can explore and click on territories of indigenous peoples and get connected to even more resources. And for a more in-depth understanding of the Granite State, check out all the educational resources at indigenousnh.com, including this interactive story map that details the indigenous presence and their stories here in New Hampshire. These resources, among others, have helped me recognize the ongoing consequences of colonialism for all people of color and the need for change in our current society. And thank you all for being here for tonight's topic. Where Have All the Monarchs Gone? By Donna Miller, owner and educator at the Petals in the Pines. And in just our brief tech rehearsal earlier today, I learned so much from Donna, and I'm really looking forward to learning even more alongside you all here this evening. And as you may know, this talk is the 11th session of a year-long webinar series called Exploring Connections to and Stewardship of the Natural World, supported by New Hampshire Humanities Council and their grant program. The past recordings of these excellent talks can be found on the New Hampshire Audubon's YouTube page, which are all linked on the series webpage. And throughout this series, we're exploring the intersection of the sciences and the humanities, finding and forging new ways to connect with nature and learn about the importance of conservation action. So I want to invite you to really take the time and space to consider how tonight's topic informs, strengthens, or otherwise support how you define yourself as a person and how you connect with other human communities as well as the wild ones. I implore you to reflect on why this topic is important to you and your personal value system and how you can connect with others through this topic in your daily life. This talk is the 7th in a series of 9 total talks focused on pollinator conservation. And we are delighted to have Donna here with us this evening, especially on such short notice. So thank you, Donna. And thank you all for joining us on Pollinator Week, celebrating our winged friends visiting our gardens. In case you didn't know, both of New Hampshire Audubon's year-round nature centers have incredibly manicured landscapes around the buildings that serve to demonstrate how landowners can benefit pollinators through planting native vegetation. The demonstration gardens at the McLean Center in Concord are managed by Diane DeLuca, senior biologist, who's here with us this evening, and her amazing crew of volunteers. And the gardens at the Massabesic Center in Auburn are managed and supported by the UNH Master Gardeners Program and their legion of volunteers. And both of these outdoor locations are open year-round and can serve as an inspiration to you in your landscaping endeavors. And most recently, we are celebrating the unveiling of a virtual tour of our demonstration gardens, now available on our website. And I'll put that there in the chat. However, before I hand it over to Donna, I would like to extend this, this preamble to take an opportunity to briefly describe how this webinar fits into the larger mission here at New Hampshire Audubon. So for those of you who don't know, New Hampshire Audubon is a state-based environmental nonprofit organization that's completely independent from National Audubon. We rely on members and donors like you to support our charitable mission, which has 4 programmatic pillars: connecting people to nature through environmental education experiences like school programs, nature day camp, which we're on day 2 of the summer day camp there at the McLean Center, as well as webinars like these. We also research and conserve species in peril, including large raptors and small birds. We also manage about 10,000 acres of wildlife sanctuaries throughout the state for habitat and recreation. And our fourth and final pillar is advocating for sound environmental policy in the New Hampshire state legislature. And I am here today because of donors and members like you. We also rely on a huge network of over 2,000 volunteers that assist us with everything: wildlife monitoring, ambassador animal care, environmental education, and wildlife sanctuary management throughout the state. If you're a volunteer, member, or supporter of New Hampshire Audubon, I'd like to sincerely thank you. We simply could not achieve our charitable mission without you. And if you would like to become part of our conservation family, which I hope you will, please check out our website for ways to get involved. We have a great turnout for this evening, so we're in full webinar mode. And so that said, please feel free to use the chat function here in Zoom for any thoughts, comments, and reactions that you might have, and the Q&A button specifically for any questions. For fun, try typing into the chat where you're watching this presentation from, since it's been really interesting to see how far our impact can reach through these webinars. Diane DeLuca, the senior biologist responsible for orchestrating this series, and I will be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A and stopping to answer questions throughout the presentation. I've also set the parameters of the Q&A so other attendees can see the questions that are being asked and can comment or upvote those questions that they want to see answered most. And I'll also be looking at Facebook Live, hey, Facebook Live friends, and kind of taking your questions and feeding them over here to the Zoom. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Diane to introduce this evening's presenter.
Thanks, Mark. We are very appreciative that Donna Miller is here with us tonight to share her expertise on monarch butterflies. So Donna is from Petals in the Pines, a diverse small farm in Canterbury. It includes a pick-your-own flower operation, walking trails and labyrinths, and an Arbor Day certified Nature Explorer outdoor classroom where she conducts programs for children. She maintains several gardens that include plants selected to attract and sustain monarch butterflies and other pollinators. Donna has been a citizen scientist for Monarch Watch since 2008 and helps with the tracking of monarchs during their fall migration. She has also been assisting Monarch Watch with the tagging and releasing of monarchs each fall. Tonight, she will share slides of her Monarch Waystation and Monarch Maternity Ward, two gardens designed specifically to attract monarchs. Her presentation, entitled, and you can all see it at this point, "Where Have All the Monarchs Gone?" will give us some insight into the monarch and their fluctuating numbers and how each of us might be able to help improve their numbers and make a difference. So welcome, Donna, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds great.
Great. Well, I want to thank New Hampshire Audubon for asking me to participate tonight, but truth be known, I was already signed up for the presentation that was supposed to happen tonight. I've been actually enjoying these webinars that you folks have put together for the last few weeks and been watching them right along. So happy to step in and help out tonight. I put this presentation together a few years ago when there was a dramatic decline in monarch numbers to the point where we had a few summers in a row and people weren't seeing monarchs at all, or very few. And then a couple years ago, suddenly we had a couple good years and we were seeing monarchs. And I thought, should I change the title to my talk? Because now everybody's seeing them again. But really the monarchs population overall is in trouble. And I think it's important to keep this topic title as it is, because we do have the ups and downs, and we're in another decline in the last couple of years, which I'll share information about that with you as we go on to the talk. So we're going to start with our first slide, and we want to make sure that, and I don't know why it's not moving. Oh, there we go. So we have a poll question. I think Mark's going to put that up, but the first thing we want to do is make sure that everybody knows how to identify a monarch butterfly. So there are 4 pictures here, numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. One of these is not a monarch. And if you can take a moment to select the one that you think is not the monarch, and I will play some background music while you decide.
These things is not like the others. One of these things doesn't belong. Can you tell which thing is not like the other by the time I finish this song?
Oh, nice. We've got some responses on Facebook Live, and we've got about half of the folks here on Zoom that voted so far. So take your best guess. We'll have it open for another few seconds. We've got some on Facebook saying number 3. And I'm going to close the polls and show you all the results.
Very good.
Donna, how did we do?
The audience did very well. Number 3 is not a monarch. It is a viceroy butterfly. And I'm going to close my little screen here. If people have the poll results up, they can close that so they can see the picture here. And I'm going to use my cursor on photo number 3 and trace this little line here on the lower wings, on the hind wing. And that line is indicative of a viceroy butterfly. If you look at the other monarchs, and granted the other 2, the wings are shut, but this one up above, picture number 1, does not have that line. And if you were to put a monarch and a viceroy side by side, the viceroy is a lot smaller than a monarch if you were to see it in the wild. So that is a way to tell the difference between a monarch and a viceroy. The other thing you'll notice in pictures 2 and 4 where the wings are closed, the hind wing or the lower wing is a much lighter color than the forewing or the top wing. And that is interesting because it doesn't look quite like that when the wings are open. But that's a good way to identify the monarch. So we'll move on to the next screen here and tell you a little bit more about the monarchs. They are from the family Danaidae, also known as the milkweed butterflies. The other milkweed butterfly is the queen. The queen is not seen around here. It's seen more in southern United States, but they use the milkweed as their food source. So that is their host plant. This is where the monarch butterfly is going to lay their eggs. They will not lay their eggs on any other plant. And it's they are protected from predators because there's a material inside the leaf of the milkweed called glycosides. And that means that if a bird or some other prey tries to eat a butterfly or eat a caterpillar, they're going to get a nasty taste from that. So it just takes one bite for them to say, oh, that doesn't taste very good. I don't think I'm going to try to eat another one of those. But that is unfortunately how we lose some of our caterpillars and butterflies because some predators do try to eat them. And the other thing we know about the monarchs is they have this amazing migration where they migrate in the fall to Mexico and come back in the following spring. And we'll talk more about that. So let's talk about the different types of butterflies and caterpillars that people often confuse for the monarch. We already talked about the viceroy, and here you can see a little bit difference in the size, and of course that V line that's on the viceroy. This is the fritillary butterfly on the left, and really the only thing they have in common are the colors, but the patterns are very different. And I have to say, if you were to see a fritillary flying around in your yard or garden, they have a very spastic flight. Their wings flit really fast and they're up, down, all around, all over the place. Whereas a monarch is very graceful when they fly. So there's a big difference in the flying pattern. This next one, it's the caterpillar that actually is mistaken for the monarch. So on the right is the monarch caterpillar, and it has the distinct stripes of yellow, black, and white. On the left is a black swallowtail caterpillar, and their host plant is anything in the umbel family, which would be dill or parsley or Queen Anne's lace, fennel, carrot, those types of plants, the ones that have the big round flowers, umbel-shaped flowers. And if you look at the caterpillar, you know, it's got those stripes, but they're different colors and they have yellow dots. And in the middle here, you can see a much smaller caterpillar, and that is actually the black swallowtail caterpillar when it's young. So it starts out black with that little white stripe in the middle. And as it gets bigger and goes through its stages, the instars, it changes its pattern to what you see on the left. And I have actually had people mistake the swallowtail for a monarch. People around town where I live know that I would take in monarch caterpillars and raise them out in years past. And I had a neighbor call and say, I have a monarch caterpillar, can I bring it to you? And I said, sure. And they showed up at my door with a milkweed leaf with a black swallowtail caterpillar on it. And I said, that's not a monarch, that's a black swallowtail. And I said, where did you find it? And he said, on my dill plant. And I said, exactly, because that's its host plant and that's what it wants to eat. And he said, no wonder why it wasn't eating the milkweed. So a lot of the clues that we get about the caterpillars we find is the plant that they are on and knowing their host plants. And this is what the butterfly looks like. Doesn't look anything like a monarch, but it comes out beautiful black butterfly. The photo on the left, you can see up here is a one of the caterpillars getting ready to form a chrysalis. And if you look closely down below, that is a chrysalis formed on the stem of this dill plant. And they have 2 broods a year, which means in the summer, early summer, the butterflies will lay eggs on the plant and they turn into caterpillars, which turn into chrysalis and outhatch an adult butterfly. And in the late summer, the same thing happens again. But when that chrysalis forms in the late summer, early fall, it stays as a chrysalis all winter long in New Hampshire, and the adult butterfly will hatch out the following year. So that's the other thing that's interesting to learn about all these different butterflies, is they all have different life cycles. So it's very different than the monarch butterfly. This yellow butterfly is flying right now. This is the tiger swallowtail. And this one is mistaken for the monarch butterfly a lot, even though the colors are different. It's just a big butterfly that's flying around and it's bright and people think, oh, it must be a monarch, but it's not. And this one has the black cherry tree or the tulip tree and aspens. Those are the trees that are actually the host plant for this butterfly. The caterpillar on the left is what it looks like right before it turns into a chrysalis. And it's usually a green caterpillar, but it changes color right before it turns into a chrysalis. So again, another interesting process for this one. Then if you have milkweed, you may have seen these guys on your milkweed. This is the tussock moth caterpillar. It's a moth, not a butterfly. And when these eggs get laid on milkweed, there are usually hundreds of them, which means you end up with a whole bunch of caterpillars. They're fuzzy and they can decimate a milkweed plant in no time. So it's kind of bothersome sometimes when we find them because they can eat a lot of milkweed before the monarchs even show up. And then you're wondering, what do I have left to feed the monarchs? So that's something that many gardeners are often concerned about. This is what that caterpillar will turn into, is just a basic little gray moth. So let's talk about the life cycle of the monarch. As I mentioned earlier, they all have a host plant, and for the monarch, it's the milkweed. And that little dot there is on the underside of a milkweed leaf. female monarch will fly around looking for milkweed, and I actually saw her, not this particular egg, but one day I was in my garden, saw a female flying around, and she hovered right over a leaf, and their abdomen goes down underneath the leaf. They deposit the egg and fly away. And I actually saw a female do it. I ran over and looked, and there was an egg there she had just deposited, which I thought was so cool. So they lay their eggs here and there. You're not going to find a whole bunch of them in one place. You're going to find them here and there. The egg is on the leaf for about 3 to 5 days. And when the caterpillar hatches out, the first thing it does is eat its egg case, and then it starts eating the leaf. So what it's going to do is just keep eating, and pooping a lot too. And if you look at the bottom right there, you can see what we call the frass, or the caterpillar poop. And if you're looking for caterpillars, that's a good way to find them, is you look for the poops on the leaves, because a lot of times the caterpillar is on the underside of the leaf and they're harder to see. But if you find piles of poop like that, that's where you want to start looking. So a caterpillar, or the larval stage, is about 9 to 14 days. And they go through what's called 5 instars, which means what they do is they eat, and they eat so much that they have to shed their skin so they can get to the next size. And that happens 5 times through these several days. This picture I love because it shows the caterpillar to chrysalis stage, and so many different things going on here. So let's start with, where's my cursor here? This caterpillar that you see hanging on the right, what they do is when they're ready to turn into a chrysalis, they often leave the milkweed plant and go somewhere else to another plant. You can find them on the sides of your house, you can find them on a weed, you can find them on a flower, you can find them on kids' toys in the yard. I mean, they will go anywhere. They get away from the milkweed plant. And what they do is they form this web. And this is in a tent that I have where I would gather up caterpillars, and they would climb to the top, and they form a web on this netting. You can't really see it because it's white, but it's really quite big. It's several inches around. And that causes them to attach to whatever they're attaching to. And this little piece right here, that little black piece, is called the cremaster. And that's, the connection between the chrysalis and that web. When a caterpillar goes and attaches itself, it is usually in this, what we call the J shape, for about a day. And if you notice the antenna, see how there's like a crook to this antenna here? But look at this caterpillar here on the left, the antennae are drooped straight down. And when that happens, you know that that caterpillar is within about an hour of turning into a chrysalis. And people often, they'll bring caterpillars in and put them in a little jar or something so they can sit and watch to see them turn into a chrysalis. And they'll say, I looked away for just only a little while, and I looked back and it was a chrysalis and I missed it. Well, this is your clue. When you see those antennae drop, just sit and stare at the thing for less than an hour, and you'll see it change. So what happens is during this phase, they kind of liquefy and they turn into the chrysalis. And in the caterpillars are dormant cells called imaginal discs. So they don't do anything while they're caterpillar. And this is when they become activated, is during this transition. So what happens is they're going to liquefy, and the parts of the caterpillar that are spared are the heart, parts of the brain, the respiratory system, and some of the abdominal muscles. But the caterpillar juice is fueling these imaginal discs, and it's causing the creation of the eyes, the antenna, the wings of the butterfly, their legs, and the genitalia. And, there's still, I think, a lot to be learned about this whole process, but that's kind of what is happening during this. And if you noticed, I said, part of what's retained from the caterpillar is the brain, parts of the brain. And scientists think that a butterfly can remember being a caterpillar. That's just kind of blows my mind when I think about that, but that would be pretty cool if that's true. So anyway, what happens is they start to liquefy. And what they're doing is they're shedding their skin for the last time, and they push the skin up and they turn into this green chrysalis shape. This picture over here, this chrysalis over here, that black thing, that is the skin that got pushed up. And usually what happens is it just falls to the ground or falls to the bottom of the net. In this case, it got stuck. It's not a problem. It just happened to get stuck there. This chrysalis over here just turned from caterpillar to chrysalis within a few minutes of me taking this photo. And see how it's all kind of bumpy? It takes about 5 minutes for the caterpillar to turn into a chrysalis. And then for the next 5 to 10 minutes, it keeps wiggling. It almost looks like it's in a straitjacket. It's in there and it's just kind of moving around like this. And within another 5 to 10 minutes, it becomes nice and smooth, like these other chrysalis that you see here. And this one over here is about to hatch into a butterfly, probably about a day later. You were just starting to be able to see the wings. And probably by the next day, from when this picture was taken, the chrysalis looks completely clear. You can see the orange and black right through, and then it would hatch. And this next photo is just a quick time lapse of that caterpillar turning into a chrysalis. And you can see that skin getting pushed up and falling off. So then when the butterfly hatches out, you've got the adult butterfly that will live for 20 to 32 days on average. And the migratory butterfly, which is the ones that hatch up here in New Hampshire, usually around the end of August, early September, they will live for about 7 months because they're the ones that are going to head to Mexico and fly back into Texas the following spring. And so this is a time lapse of one actually hatching out of the chrysalis. So I'll play this through a few times so you can see it. They're head down, they come up, they have little hooks on the end of their feet, and they hook right into those nets. And you know, they're very stable. Whatever they're hanging on to, they're able to hang on very well. They take about 4 hours for their wings to dry completely. And because we'll be talking about tagging in a little bit, but because we tag, they always say wait at least 4 hours before you put a tag on a hatched butterfly. And they won't fly during this time. They are just gonna stay there and stretch their wings and get ready for the next step. So this is a summary of what we just talked about. We've got the adult that lays the egg just for a few days. We have the eggs 3 to 5 days. Then we have the larva or the caterpillar. The chrysalis is another 8 to 13 days. So it's about 20 to 32 days total for one generation of monarch. I have seen some of these phases go much longer. We had a chrysalis, the very first one we ever found in our garden back when I got into monarchs when my kids were really little. We discovered a caterpillar in the J shape on a weed in our garden. And we had pulled the weed up and found the chrysalis, or not the chrysalis, the caterpillar. And we decided that we wanted to watch what it did. So I replanted the weed and watered it so it would live. And that caterpillar turned into a chrysalis that day. And it was a chrysalis for 3 solid weeks. So sometimes they can be really extreme from these amounts of days that they suggest. So now let's put this in perspective of an entire year. So the butterflies that we saw last September, if you look at the bottom of this calendar here, the ones that we saw here in New Hampshire last September, those butterflies, when they hatch, they go into a phase called diapause, which means they have no desire to breed. You think about it, there's not a lot of milkweed left because the caterpillars before them have been eating it all. The day length is shorter, the temperatures are cooler, and in their mind, all they know is they need to fuel up and fly south. And so September, October, November, they're flying south. They get down into Mexico in anywhere in November, December, and they winter over in the Oyamel forest down there. And by the time spring rolls around down there, these butterflies have been alive now for several months. Their wings are getting worn. A lot of them are faded in color, but many of them have the energy to start turning around and flying north. And those butterflies fly north into Texas, starting in the spring, April and into May. And they breed at that point, finally, for the first time, and they lay their eggs. The females lay their eggs, and then they die. And this is typical for butterflies and moths in general, is that a lot of them have very short lives, except for this migratory monarch. Their purpose of life is to breed and create more caterpillars, and then they die. So a lot of these do not have a very long lifespan as an adult butterfly or moth. But anyway, so this first generation, they're usually in Texas or thereabouts. Those eggs hatch, and now we're going to go through that 30-day cycle again. So the eggs are going to hatch, we're going to have caterpillars, they're going to make chrysalis, the adults are going to hatch from that, and they're just going to keep moving north. And that cycle keeps happening over and over again. So you see the second, third, and fourth generation that happens from the monarch that flew down there last fall from the Northeast or upper Midwest. So that's what happens, is the ones that we're going to see here, or actually I've already seen 2 monarchs here so far this spring. So they're probably in the second generation. So they're just going to keep doing this life cycle. And eventually the ones that are going to hatch here at the end of our summer in August and early September, they will be the ones that will fly south. September 15th is actually the peak migration time from New Hampshire. That's when you'll see a lot of monarchs heading south. So this map shows the difference between the 2 populations. The Rocky Mountains separates the migratory ones that leave North America and head to Mexico. Anything west of the Rockies, they winter over on the coast of California, and they move on up into the Pacific Northwest and other states during the summer. And I wrote down the numbers here somewhere. The Western population is really, they got a lot of media coverage in this last year. In 1997, they did counts, been doing counts for several years on the population's estimations. And in 1997, the count for the Western population, west of the Rockies, was 1.2 million monarch butterflies. This January of 2021, they observed monarchs in 261 different locations, and they counted 1,914 monarchs. That is a huge decline. There are big concerns out in the West, and they are really working hard to increase habitat out there. So what happens in the spring migration is the monarchs that are coming north out of Mexico, like I said, they come into Texas. Some head straight up and go right up through the Midwest, up into southern Canada, and others veer off and end up here in the Northeast. And then likewise in the fall, they head back down into Mexico, and it's like a funnel. So I think people who are in Texas will see massive clouds of monarch butterflies coming down through, because they're coming from all over North America, east of the Rockies, coming down through, but then they'll see a lot as they come through Texas into Mexico in November. Notice over in Florida what happens. There's butterflies that are coming down from the Northeast, from the New England area, and some of them detour into Florida. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes when we start talking about milkweed. And of course, the ones west of the Rockies go to the California coast, where there's some groves there. Now this chart, I'm not sure if you can read all the numbers, but I'll give you the gist of it. And the colored bars kind of tell the story. These colored bars represent the population of monarch butterflies based on counts they've been doing since 1994-95. So the first year that you see on the left was the first year they recorded these counts, and they measure it in hectares, because what they're doing is they're doing a view of how many hectares that the monarchs take up in the forests in Mexico when they're overwintering. And 1 hectare equals 2.5 acres to us, just for a correlation, gives you some idea. And they estimate about 50 million monarch butterflies per hectare. So if you look at 96, 97, which is the tallest bar, 18.19 hectares, that represented about 1 billion with a B monarch butterflies. And the column all the way over to the right is this past winter, 2020-21. So what they do is they measure in the wintertime. So they're looking at the monarchs that have traveled there from the fall, they're wintering over. And that's why they have like 2 years listed there, but it's really, they do the measurement, I think, in like January or February, they do the measurements. So you've probably heard quite a bit, there's been a 90% decline in monarch butterfly population. And if you look at that 1 year of 96, 97, that was very, very high. Now, we don't know what the numbers were prior to that, but we've definitely seen a huge decline over these years. And what the scientists would like to see, the researchers believe that a sustainable population would be a 6 hectare average. So 3 years ago, 2018, 2019, that was 6.05. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what's around 6 hectares. But the average from 94 to 2020 was about 5.4 hectares. And in the last 16 years since 2004, that average has dropped to 3.34 hectares. So the big challenge is to get that average back up again. And we're up against a lot of things, and we'll be talking about that in the threats. So one of the threats would be illegal logging of the oyamel trees in Mexico. And this has been something that's been ongoing for years. They have a specific climate forest area that they go to, and it's been a real issue. And I think it's political, and it's, you know, they're a different country, okay? So they've got some real issues down there. So that's been a real problem that they have to stay on. For us, we're dealing with fragmented habitat. And I think if you've been watching any of these series from New Hampshire Audubon, we've heard this phrase probably over and over again about how to protect the pollinators. We have fragmented habitat. This is an aerial view of Manchester, New Hampshire. And when a butterfly is flying, or any pollinator or bird for that matter, and they're looking for a place to stop and get some food, there's a lot more gray on that map than there is green. So we have to be able to provide as much food as we can for these insects. There's also a lack of the milkweed habitat, and this is just an example of a monoculture, probably somewhere in the Midwest, getting close to the mountains there. But just that agricultural practices have changed a lot. So the ability to have Roundup ready corn or soybeans, things that can resist Roundup, crops that can resist Roundup, but the Roundup will kill all the weeds, including milkweed. In the old days, the way they controlled the weeds is they put a tractor through the field to cultivate the rows in between, and it would turn up the weeds for a time, but a milkweed could often grab back on and keep growing, and, you know, may not be as big as they were before, but there would still be some weeds in those rows, you know, in between. And then also farms are growing from one edge to the other and not leaving those buffers of weeds and pollinator plants that are so important and vital. And there has been a huge decline in monarchs that kind of correlated with the Roundup ready crops. So this is what we would really like to see, is if there's going to be agricultural fields, and even in our own yards, this is ideal, is to have a perimeter of milkweed and other pollinator plants around the edges. And we also have to be concerned about pesticide use and misuse. That is a real concern. My feeling on agricultural use is that this is a tool that many farms use, but farmers are trained and licensed to apply pesticides, and many of them practice IPM and apply pesticides as a last resort. But it's still, you know, if there's any drift, it can cause problems with killing insects and butterflies. There are plenty of over-the-counter chemicals available to every homeowner. You can walk into any box store and there are so many different things there. And I sometimes wonder if people who are using home chemicals, you know, on their home gardens, yards, etc., you know, are really, if they're not following the labels and that type of thing, that, you know, it's causing a really big problem in our backyards, and we're losing all kinds of insects as a result. So we really need to either stop using chemicals or reduce chemical use it as a last resort if possible. The weather has huge effects on the monarch population. The temperature, it only takes a minor change in mean temperature in the spring during the migration for it to affect the monarch population negatively. And the scientists track the temperatures in, you know, during the migration period, during the summer, all year long, to see how that impacts the population. We did have 2 falls ago, if you remember, 2019, our fall here in the Northeast was very, very, very warm. And it was warm for a long time. And the monarchs just hung around. What happened as a result was they didn't leave and they didn't head south. And then suddenly it got cold and it was too late. And many of them didn't make the trip from the north. So that's one way that temperature can affect. The other way is drought. So for example, when the monarchs are heading south, they are not looking for milkweed, they're looking for nectar. So they're looking for those late flowering plants so they can feed on the nectar so that they can fuel themselves for the trip. And we have had many droughts in the south in the fall. And if there is not enough food, those monarchs don't have enough energy to make the trip south. So what can we do? We can plant monarch waystations, and this is a place that we can do in our own backyards, and groups are doing them at schools and in parks and all kinds of places. We have a waystation here, and there will be a link to how you can create a waystation. It doesn't take a lot of space. 10 feet by 10 feet is the minimum size that Monarch Watch would like to be planted, and it has to include milkweed and it has to include nectar plants. And you can read the information at the link on how to establish one. So you have to have the milkweed. So this is the plant we're looking for. We all recognize that floss that flies around in the fall when the pods open. There are, if you're watching, I don't know if there are people here from other parts of the country, but if there are different milkweeds that grow in different parts of the country. So again, you can check the link at Monarch Watch about the milkweed seed and the milkweed plants and what grows in your area. For the Northeast, we have 3 that are very popular and grow well. So we're looking for the genus Asclepius, and there are 3 species that we have. This one on the left is Syriaca, which is the common milkweed. Beautiful, round, looks like a pom-pom. The scent on this flower is heavenly. It smells so good. I wish I could package it in a bottle. So this is the one that most people are used to. You see it in fields and on the sides of the road. The milkweed that I really love is the one in the lower right here. It's Asclepias incarnata, and this is referred to as swamp milkweed or rose milkweed. And I happen to be a cut flower grower, and I saw this plant listed several years ago before I was really into monarchs very much. And I was like, oh, I'm going to grow this for my cut flowers. This will be pretty in the bouquets. And I remember going out one day to cut some flowers, and there were monarch caterpillars all over it. The leaves are thinner, they're more succulent. I think that the caterpillars preferred, or the butterfly actually, because the butterfly is the one who puts the eggs there. So so it's really nice. And the difference is that the monarch, or excuse me, the milkweed, the common milkweed will spread in an area, whereas the swamp milkweed stays put. It has a fibrous root system and it doesn't spread. So that's one thing that's really nice about it. And it's really pretty in your landscape. The butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, that's a much lower plant, lower to the ground, grows about 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall. But again, that one you'll find very commonly in nurseries and such. And that's the third milkweed that grows here. The controversial milkweed is Asclepias chrysalica, and this one also goes by the name bloodflower. It has a few other names. I wanted to grow this as a cut flower. I like the color combination. It reminded me of bittersweet, which we shouldn't grow because it's an invasive plant. And I thought, I'm going to grow this for bouquets, and I successfully grew it one year. And then the following year, the caterpillars wouldn't let me have any of it because they just ate it all. But the reason why it's controversial is because, number one, it's not native to the United States, and it grows year round as a perennial in the South. So remember that map I showed you where some of the butterflies come down to go to Mexico, but some of them detour to Florida? They're not going to Disneyland, they're going to get their chrysalica. So this is the milkweed that blooms year round, and they will get knocked out of diapause. They see this and they're like, oh, I can go breed and go lay some eggs. And they get detoured and don't end up making the full migration. There's also some scientific research about, there's a protozoa parasite called, I can't say the name because it's a mile long, but they abbreviate it as OE. And the butterflies, it seems like down in this part of the country, seems to get more OE, but there's some little conflicting research on whether or not the butterflies do better with this milkweed if they get infected with the OE. So it's something that they prefer, that the scientists prefer, that we don't grow. Excuse me, quick water break there. All right, so in my garden here, we have a picture of common milkweed on the left and swamp milkweed on the right. And the one on the left, you can start to see the leaves are getting dark and gnarly. And I find at the end of the summer, the plants just aren't as pretty anymore. And the swamp milkweed seems to hold up okay, as long as all the leaves aren't eaten. It's actually an attractive plant in the landscape. This is the area I refer to as our Monarch maternity ward, because where the milkweed grows, that's where the monarchs are going to lay their eggs. So that's where the little families are. And this is on the west side of our house. And actually our septic system is under this. And it turns out to be a great place to have a meadow type area. This spot does not look like this at all anymore, because several of these trees have been cut down and we have solar panels now, which was actually a good thing because it ended up creating a lot more sun in the area. You can see how shaded this is, but basically what I did was I stopped mowing the area, and all I did was mow paths. And then I set up some sticks and twine around so people would walk the paths and not walk into the center, because within these patches, there are milkweed plants, and then there's some pollinator, some floral plants too in late summer, goldenrod and such. And so I would have field kids come here for field trips, and they would be able to walk on the paths and look inside and look for the monarchs. So let's talk about growing milkweed and how to harvest the seeds. So what you want to do is make sure to pick mature pods. So you want to wait until you see the pod actually start to crack. And sometimes people will pick pods early and they're still kind of soft. And if you crack those pods open and the seeds are green, then they're not ready. So you want to actually wait, usually into September, and the seed should be brown. And there are different ways that you can save the seed. It's kind of a messy job because this floss will blow all around, so you might want to do it outside. I usually just wrap my fingers right around the end of the pod here and just hang on really tight and hold the pod over a bowl and just shake the brown seeds off into the bowl. Some people will take like a paper bag, a big bag, and put the pods inside with something like a golf ball and just shake, 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 and then cut a hole in the bottom of the paper bag and shake the seeds out. So there's different ways to separate them. And then you just want to store them in a cool, dry area. So, and all the information on how to grow milkweed is on a link that's going to be shared in the chat and sent out afterwards, so you don't feel like you have to write all this down, because all this information will be provided. So the seeds need to be vernalized, which means they need a cold treatment. And so we do that through stratification, which means putting the seeds in a cold, dark area for about 30 to 60 days. So there's a couple ways you can do that. One is you can take a little tray and put some sand in it and just make sure it's damp, not wet, just lightly, lightly damp. And you can put that in your refrigerator and just tuck it in the back of the refrigerator. Just don't forget it's there. And this would be something you might do around January or February. And the other way you could do it is take a very lightly damp paper towels and lay the seeds in between that and do the same thing. Put them in a plastic bag, stick them in the fridge. Then you're going to pull them out maybe around March or so, and you want to shock the seeds. You're going to soak them in warm water for about a day. And then, just like you would plant anything, any other perennial seed, you're going to start them in the house. You can do it about 4 to 8 weeks before the last frost. So that would be maybe sometime March or April. You can use a standard seed starter mix if you like. Make sure the soil is nice and wet. And plant them about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch apart in deep pots. They have deep roots, so you want to make sure that they end up in deep pots. And like we start most of our seeds, they should have warm soil, about 70 degrees. I've read conflicting information whether or not the seeds need light to germinate or not. I've seen it both ways, but really you don't want to cover them with a lot of soil. And if you want to just make sure you got yourself covered, just cover some seeds and some don't, and see which ones do best. And then you just want to make sure it stays moist, the soil stays moist, water them from the bottom. And once they start to grow, you can put them under grow lights or in a south window. And then you want to harden them off before you put them outside. Give them a few days to get used to the outdoor temperatures. This would probably be around May or so. And then you can put them outside after the last frost when they're about 3 to 6 inches tall. And you can spread them about 1 foot apart. And the plants do like well-drained soil. And when people see the name swamp milkweed, they think, oh, I must have to have a swamp in order to grow this. Well, you don't. You can grow it in any garden setting, but they do like to have plenty of water. So just make sure in a drought period that they're getting watered now and again. And they do much better in full sun. My Monarch maternity ward that I showed you earlier, that picture, that area was starting to get very shaded. So when we cut the trees down to put in solar panels, we now have more sun and have a lot more milkweed now than we did before. So the other way you can grow milkweed is you can start the seeds outside in the late fall and let winter be the cold treatment. And this is by far the easiest way to do it. And this is my little Lego character over here. That's Lego Donna. And if you look down here, that little tiny green leaf coming up to the left, and then right down here in the front, those are milkweed seeds germinating. So what I do is go out into an area in my meadow with this bare soil. There's no competition of other plants. and I scratch up the soil in the fall. And you want to do this like late October. It's before the ground freezes, but you don't want to do it so early that they're going to germinate in the fall. So you definitely don't want to do this in September. And put those seeds down, market the area well. And then this was, I came out, this is not this spring, the year before, but in around mid-May, I could start to see these little babies germinating. And then I let them grow to about this stage that you see in the middle, and I dug them all up. And I planted them in these pots, and you can see how deep, when I mentioned about deep pots, I put them in there. Some of them I actually left out in the garden, and they bloomed within that first year. So if they're left, you know, if you dig them up and you spread them out in your garden, they'll grow right up and they'll do really well the first year. And then this is the common milkweed. And the difference between the common milkweed and the swamp milkweed, as I mentioned earlier, is the common milkweed has a taproot. And so some people want to dig this up and transplant it, and you need to do it at about this stage if you're going to have success with it. But the other thing about these roots is they send out root systems that go horizontal underground, and then they'll have like a little node that shoots up another plant like this. And that's why they keep coming back, and you just have to keep pulling them if they're in a part of your garden that you don't want them. And you know, like I said, they're hard to transplant, but that is how the common milkweed will grow, and it'll just spread and fill an area where the other one will not spread around. So to have a monarch waystation, the other thing we need to provide will be the nectar plants, because once the butterflies hatch, they are looking for nectar, and they will do some pollinating as well. They're kind of accidental pollinators, you know, they may get some pollen on their wings and pollinate flowers, but really they're looking for nectar. So all of these are perennials except for the zinnia. The purple coneflower is very popular. The ironweed is this one over on the right. These grow anywhere from 6 to 8 feet tall. And once you have an ironweed, you'll always have it, because the birds drop the seeds all over the place and it comes up everywhere. So just keep an eye for it. Joe Pye weed is a good one. The goldenrod and the fall asters are very important, especially for the monarchs that are still in the end of September and early October. And zinnias are a great annual flower to grow that they will spend a lot of time visiting. So this is our monarch waystation that I planted many, many years ago here. It's grown in quite a bit. This is a spring shot. So, you know, we've got chives in here. So the monarchs aren't generally here this time of year, but these are just some different plants that I put in. And this is a late summer photo. So this one, you see more of the flowers that will be around when the monarchs are here. So here we've got some autumn joy sedum, we've got some brown-eyed Susans, some tall phlox, the ironweed growing up in the back, purple coneflowers over here. The other thing that's good for a butterfly garden is to have rock in the area, because the heat that's generated off the rock helps the area be warm, and the butterflies will not fly till it's about 65 degrees out. So if there's heat generated in that area, that will help them. And over here on the lower right, you will see this is ledge. We have a lot of ledge on our property, and I had to build this garden up and do a raised bed so I could grow the plants, but I scraped the soil off the ledge here as a walkway, but the heat that comes off of that is really strong, and it helps warm up the area. There's also hemlocks behind here, and some lilacs, you know, so there is some protection in the area as well, which they like. And a lot of times they go up into the trees at night when they're not feeding. The other thing is, when I mentioned about the rock, if you have a house where you have a sidewalk, if you have a stone walkway, anything like that, that is a perfect place to grow some pollinator plants, some of these flowers around there that'll help heat up the area, and that's when you'll see them flying and enjoying the flowers. And there's another view of that garden. So let's talk about the tagging. The tagging is done by Monarch Watch, and what they do is people from all around the country sign up to become taggers. We're called citizen scientists, and you can order tags. I think I get 25 tags for $15, and they come in the mail, and they will not send them to you until it's time to start tagging, because any monarch I see right now, I'm not going to tag because they're not the ones going to Mexico. So I don't start tagging until the very end of August or early September. And these stickers are, I often say they're about the size of my pinky fingernail. They're very small, but all that information is on that little tag, and you have an identification number at the bottom. And you can keep track of all the tags that you put on butterflies. You have to identify if they're male or female, the date that you tag them. Did you catch the butterfly in the wild, or did you rear it in a tent? And you record all that information and where you tagged it, and then you release the butterfly. And what let's just talk about this for a second. So when you identify male or female, these little dots on the top butterfly, these are indicative of a male butterfly, and these veins you'll see are very thin, these black lines. This female does not have those dots, and their veins are much more, they're thicker than the male. So what the purpose of the tagging is, the researchers go down to Mexico in the wintertime, and there are many butterflies that don't make it over the winter. They fall to the forest floor, and they gather up the ones that have tags on them, and they're able to tell where they come from. And what they've learned over the years, sadly for us in the Northeast, is a lot of the ones from the Northeast do not make it to Mexico. Most of what they see comes out of the Midwest because they have a shorter flight. They're going straight down to Mexico, whereas the butterflies from New England have to come down and around. So it's a lot more miles to get there. But that also explains why there's been a big drop in population, because there's that thoroughfare in the Midwest is where we've lost so much habitat of the milkweed that has negatively impacted the population. So in order to tag, if you have a loose butterfly, it's easier to do with two people. And so I'm holding a monarch, I'm holding the top wings, and my friend Steph has a toothpick with that little sticker on it. And you just basically lay the sticker on the wing. You can see it over here, and just pull the toothpick out and just give it a quick squeeze, like 1 second, and it's on there, and it does not impact the way that they fly. A lot of people ask if it throws them off balance, but it doesn't cause a problem at all. This, to me, is the easier way to tag them when they're in a tent. When they're at the top, you can almost see the little hooks at the end of their feet, but they like hang on, and I can just reach in, lay that tag on the wing, squeeze for a quick second, and it's on there. This is actually a video that doesn't work, unfortunately, but if you remind me later, I can share this video from my desktop, and I can show you how we do this. But this is one of our Monarch festivals, and the kids gather around when we tag and love to watch that. And here's a monarch who's been tagged, and she's showing off her new jewelry to the bumblebee, where she's sharing a meal with Anna Zinnia. So they're able to get around quite well. So just a little bit about what we do here. We like to share and do a lot of education with kids and families. And we have field trips here from the local school in Canterbury. They've come, and we go out and we learn to look for caterpillars. And I do an activity with them called Eagle Eyes. And this little boy on the left, if your kids are in Audubon, they've probably done this activity if they've gone to summer camp, but it's picking up anything off the ground and looking at it, and then really honing in and saying, okay, let me look a little deeper. Is there something on this leaf that I didn't see the first time? And then looking a little deeper again and saying, okay, what's really here? What can I find? And it's really interesting when we look for these tiny little things, how much stuff we can find on the ground, on the plants around us. So the egg in the bottom picture, that's something you've got to look underneath the leaf to find the eggs. The caterpillars, they are often underneath the leaf as well. And over here on the right, this butterfly that's hatched right here and you can see the clear chrysalis, and here's another picture of a clear chrysalis down here after one hatched. This is the actual weed that we pulled up many, many years ago and stuck back in the ground and watered it and kept the weed alive just so that monarch could go through its life cycle. And we tied a piece of plastic on it just so we could find it, because we go out to the garden and say, I know it's in here somewhere. But now I've gotten to the point where I'm very fine-tuned into what's where on different plants and everything, and they're easy to spot. So it's just really paying attention to your surroundings and knowing what you're looking for. The chrysalises, like I said, you can find them in all different interesting places. And they can be tricky when they're out in among, you know, green plants, but you can find them. And so here are some kids that have come. These kids are out in the Monarch maternity ward looking. This young man just graduated from high school, so that tells you how long ago this picture was taken. And here are some kids we did a 4-H project, and there's a monarch caterpillar on the bottom of that milkweed leaf right there. And this is one of our field trips. This was really fun. I had this tent, and I mentioned earlier about the antenna and the antenna going limp and knowing when a caterpillar is about to turn into a chrysalis. And I was expecting our 2nd grade class to show up for a field trip, and they're right down the road, the school is, and I'm watching this caterpillar going, it is gonna turn into a chrysalis any minute now. And I was expecting the school to show up, and I could hear all the cars coming, and they pulled into our driveway, and this tent was set up out in our backyard, and I ran down the driveway, and as soon as everyone got out of the car, I just said, run, and they all followed me, and we ran up the hill. And they were able to all see this caterpillar turn into a chrysalis. It happened right as they came up the hill. And this dad right here is, you know, videotaping the whole thing on his phone. So it's really cool when they get to experience this. They have a much greater appreciation for the natural world. Over the years, I have gathered a lot of caterpillars, collected them. People would bring them to me, drop them off at my house, and I would hatch them out. I'm doing less of that now. I am concerned about the OE parasite. We do have a Monarch Festival in September, so I will catch up a few caterpillars in the couple weeks leading up to the event, just so I have a few things to share and show. But this is one thing that we really have to be concerned about. And if you ever have the desire, or if you are collecting caterpillars and chrysalis and so on in tents, be very careful about the cleanliness, keeping your tents clean, changing the milkweed every day. They're like a pet. You have to clean out the litter box every day. If you've got caterpillars in there, they're pooping all over the base of that tent, and you have to clean it out every single day. So it is really important to do it right and make sure you have the right food in there for them. I have seen people raising caterpillars in tents, and they're just not taken care of properly. So you just need to make sure you're doing the right thing if you want to do this. We will have our Monarch Festival this year on September 11th. It's always a Saturday after Labor Day. We have all kinds of activities for kids. We have master gardeners here. We have several vendors who have products related to monarchs, and a lot of monarch children's book authors with stories about monarchs. So it's a really fun event. You can follow our Facebook or Instagram page, Petals in the Pines, or sign up for emails from our website, petalsinthepines.com. We have done field trips here, as I mentioned, which is a lot of fun to educate the kids. We do birthday parties for kids. We have Spread Your Wings Days, which is Thursdays from 9 to 2. We're certified at Arbor Day Nature Explore Outdoor Classroom, so we do a lot of outdoor activities for kids. And we have what's called tail trails, where we take nature books and put the pages on signs, and people can walk with their families along the woodland trails and read the story as they go, and it leads you to our pavilion where we have activities related to the story afterwards. And lately I've been doing a pollinator story for August and September. And I think this year my book is going to be The Seeds of the Milkweed, which is a new book that just came my way. It's not a new book. It's been around for a while, but it was written by 2nd graders in Arkansas. So I think we're going to be dedicated to the seeds of the milkweed this year. And I make sure that the the tail trail goes through our pollinator meadow. So as the kids are reading the story, they can actually see milkweed and see butterflies and so on. And how can you help? Well, of course, we need more milkweed. And I was reading an article recently from Monarch Watch, and they are trying as hard as they can to get more milkweed planted. And it costs a lot of money to get milkweed out. They're trying to do it free, distributing milkweed seed. But if you can grow any milkweed on your property, that is helpful. And of course, you need to have the nectar flowers as well. It's very helpful to choose native plants, not just for the monarch, but for all pollinators and bees and so on. A lot of these recommendations are not just good for the monarch, but good for all insects in general. And we've been hearing about a lot of that through these webinars from Audubon in the last few weeks. Mow less, which means reduce the size of your lawn. That's what we did, that area where we have the Monarch Maternity Ward. That used to be our kids' play yard. I mowed that every week, and they had a sandbox and a little kiddie pool, and I decided to stop mowing it, and the monarchs moved in. So it was worth doing it. If you have invasive plants, make sure to remove them, because they're just going to take over and reduce the habitat for a lot of these insects and birds and so on. Leave the leaves. That means in the spring and the fall, reduce leaf cleanup. It's hard to look at a bed that's full of leaves, but by this time of year, June, my beds, you can't see the leaves anymore because the plants have grown up, but there are insects and moths, chrysalis, all different types of stages of life in those leaves, and they'll keep hatching out throughout the year. Build up brush piles to create spaces for different animals to live in. Avoiding the pesticide and chemical fertilizers, and plants with neonics, which I believe that there are less plants being treated with neonicotinoids now than there were before. But we just want to really, the chemical use is really been detrimental in home landscapes for our bees and our birds. And then also spread the word, let people know how you can help. 2 books that I recommend. One is The Monarch, Saving Our Most Loved Butterfly by Kylie, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Baumle, B-A-U-M-L-E. That is a great user-friendly book. Lots of great pictures. And then also Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy. This has been brought up in numerous talks lately. He's an entomologist from University of Delaware. And this book has so many great ideas and ways to reduce your lawn and grow more native plants to support insects. So educate yourself as much as you can. And these are some organizations I like to follow. Monarch Watch is where I buy my tags for tagging the butterflies. The Million Pollinator Garden Challenge, I think they hit their millionth garden recently. So that was a challenge to get over 1 million pollinator gardens registered in the United States. Journey North, that is a website where they don't just track monarchs, they'll track things like hummingbirds too, and different species, but people can take photographs or go on the website and put down sightings that they have of when they saw their first monarch or when they saw their first egg or caterpillar and that type of thing. And the Monarch Joint Venture is a great organization of lots of different organizations coming together to help support the Monarch Butterfly. And there's a lot of organizations involved with that. There's so much educational information on that website. It's really worth checking out. And that is my last slide. I thank you for attending. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them now.
Thanks, Donna. That was great. I'll start out with a couple of questions about plants. So is the milkweed actually poisonous to other predators or just distasteful?
I think it's more distasteful to them. Yeah, so it turns them off when they get that first bite. they don't like the taste.
Any suggestions for critters that are eating, especially swamp and butterfly milkweed?
Critters? You mean other?
Yeah, like deer or chipmunks or something along those lines that.
I haven't had any experience with deer or chipmunks eating any of mine. So I don't really, I haven't really had that challenge. I have had people ask me about other caterpillars that are eating milkweed, like the tusk moth caterpillar, which, like I said, can decimate a milkweed plant in no time. And my feeling on that is, as much as I would love to remove all of them, I don't. I just kind of let nature take its course, because sometimes you have populations that are up and some that are down. You know, last year, I think I saw one tussock moth caterpillar all year, but other years I've seen a ton. So I just, I don't know. And like I said, I've not had an issue with we have a lot of chipmunks here too, and deer, and I've not had that experience with them bothering any of my milkweed. So I don't know how to answer that.
What are some of the most common invasive plants in our area?
Invasive, where do I begin? Oriental bittersweet, glossy buckthorn, burning bush. Burning bush can still be sold, and it's the bush that turns bright red in the fall, and people use it as an ornamental in their yard because they look really pretty. But their seeds can be eaten by birds and then dropped elsewhere, and they can decimate a forest area that isn't probably normally seen by most people because it might be deep in the woods, but it can take over and it displaces native plants. What's some of the other ones on the top of my mind here? Because I'm trying to think what I have here that I'm always pulling up. Oh, Japanese knotweed, of course. I don't have Japanese knotweed, but it's all up and down my road, so I keep an eye out for it. Autumn olive. If you go to the Department of Agriculture, there is information on their website about invasive plants. They have a booklet available of how to identify them and how to remove them. There's 4 types of honeysuckle. Unfortunately, years ago, I bought a honeysuckle from a plant sale from a legitimate organization, and that was before they knew that it was an invasive plant, and now I'm working hard to get rid of it. So there is a native honeysuckle, but these were invasive, the ones that I bought.
Donna, here's a question about the black swallowtail. Does the chrysalis of the black swallowtail stay on the host plant or drop into the leaf debris for the winter?
The black swallowtail one, it may not stay on the host plant. It might go somewhere else. But it does not go in the leaf litter that I know of, because I don't know if you could tell from the photograph, but there were 2 fine little, they look like thin threads that they hang onto. And so when they form their chrysalis, they make that, it's almost like an upside down J shape. And then they have these little threads and then they form their chrysalis. I have found a black swallowtail chrysalis on a paper plate that was in my pavilion. I found one, I had a black tray, that you get at a nursery when you buy plants. And I had one that sat outside for a while, and I picked it up and there was a chrysalis, a black swallowtail chrysalis under the plastic tray. So they attach to something. And what I did in the case of both of those, you never want to bring them in the house because they expect to live the winter outside. And so I left them outside all winter, and in the spring when I'm outside working, I would walk by them every day. The paper plate I tacked up on the wall and the plastic tray I leaned up against the wall, and every day I would go out there and look at them, and eventually they would hatch and fly away. So.
Oh, thanks, Donna. I know you mentioned that you've already seen a couple of monarchs, but the question is, when do you expect the first monarchs to appear in southern New Hampshire? So when do they typically start to move in any numbers?
Yeah, I usually have not expected to see them this early, and I think lately they've been coming earlier. A couple years ago, I saw one on Memorial Day, and I was shocked, and I was like, this is way too early. And people would say to me in years past, oh, I saw a monarch, and I'm like, no, you didn't. You saw a fritillary, or no, you saw a tiger swallowtail. But they are starting to come up sooner, and I think a lot of it has to do with climate change. But I think normally we're used to seeing them more around probably the end of July, early August is when we'll start seeing them in more abundance. Partly because the ones that are coming up here are laying eggs and having caterpillars and chrysalis, and then those butterflies are hatching. So we'll see them in much more abundance, I think, the end of July, early August. And if you go to Journey North, you can go to the Journey North website and look at the state of New Hampshire and see what sightings are out there from other people. And you will probably find that people have seen them already in southern New Hampshire.
Thanks, Donna. So here's a question that probably a lot of us ask. Common milkweed is overtaking my side yard. I want to help the monarchs, but any way to corral the milkweed? It multiplies like crazy and returns annually.
Yep, grow swamp milkweed. That's the easy answer. People, a lot of times when I say to people grow milkweed, they're like, I'm not going to grow milkweed. It takes over. The common milkweed takes over. The swamp milkweed does not. And it's really pretty in the garden. A lot of people grow tall phlox, the garden phlox. It grows like 3 or 4 feet tall, and they have big pink flowers. I would put the swamp milkweed as like a comparable plant for the height in your garden, so you could put it in the back of your bed, and you will attract monarchs. And I think that's a good answer. And you can also grow the butterfly weed as well, the small orange one.
So one question, I'm not sure if scientists have looked at this, but when the butterflies kind of veer off and go to Florida and go out of diapods, do they have any sense of what the population is that's doing that?
Oh, what percentage?
And whether that's actually having an impact? Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, if they've tracked that or not. Because I suspect that they must be finding some that have tags on them, because you would think that the ones, people all over the United States are tagging. So if there are any that are going south and they veer off, they must be finding some down there. What it takes is, for when a monarch dies, if a person finds a monarch butterfly laying on the ground and picks it up and sees a tag on it, is that person going to look closely at that tag and go, oh, maybe I should call this phone number? Because that's what it takes, is for them to pick it up, call the phone number and say, I found a butterfly in Tampa, Florida, and let them know. What's happening is the researchers are heading down to Mexico, and they're gathering up the dead ones down there, and they're finding them there. So yeah, I'm not sure if they're getting any reports, or many reports of butterflies in Florida, and if they're able to estimate how many are veering off.
If I could interject a question, Donna.
Sure.
How did you get interested in all of this? And what's the most inspirational part of the Monarch story to you?
So how I got started, that monarch that I mentioned to you that was on the weed in our garden, that was the summer that my son had finished 2nd grade. And the 2nd grade teacher in our school here in Canterbury sent home a letter prior to him starting 2nd grade saying, we study the monarch butterfly in 2nd grade. We'd like you to go look for milkweed and see if you can find caterpillars and bring them to school. And I've been gardening my whole life. And I was like, what do you mean monarch caterpillars on milkweed? You know, it was kind of new to me. I mean, we all see monarch butterflies flying around, like we see the black flies and the mosquitoes and everything else. And it's like, oh, the monarch butterflies. But I didn't know anything about the life cycle. And so Jesse's class studied it, and I went into the class a few times and saw what they did, and I was interested. But that following summer, right after he finished school, we found that caterpillar on the weed, and Jesse was running around the backyard, and I said, Jesse, we just found this caterpillar. What do we do? And he said, oh, leave it there. It'll turn into a chrysalis, and then a butterfly will hatch. And we're like, okay. So that's why we planted the weed again, which now, like nowadays, I would just take it and put it in a tent. But back then I didn't have a tent. So anyway, I was just so intrigued by that whole thing. And it really made me realize that a child can learn the life cycle of insects in about a month's time by watching the monarch, and they can see and witness so much and learn so much. And it ties into geography, you know, learning about Mexico and all those different things. So that was how I got interested. And I just started, I don't know, researching it. You know, I found out about Monarch Watch, and little by little I got doing it. Around in 2010, I became a master gardener. In 2011, I did the Natural Resource Stewards Program through Cooperative Extension too. And it was just little by little, all these, you know, courses that I was taking, I just was, you know, I got very, very interested, and it's become very apparent. I mean, in the 20 years that we've been gardening and doing things here, the changes that we've seen from climate and so on and so forth. And first of all, creating the habitat here, because when we bought this property, it was all woods. There were no gardens here. Excuse me, there was a little vegetable garden and a few flowers, but it was all woods. And we have opened up and put in a lot of gardens, and we have so much life here now, you know, of butterflies and birds and so on and so forth, a lot of wildlife. And so that's, it's just been, to me, it's just very inspiring just to be connected to the natural world like that. And right now I'm working towards my advanced master gardener certification, and the new protocol for that is to pick a subject of interest. So my subject of interest is pollinators and native plants. So that's something that I'll be pursuing more. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Donna.
Sure.
What a cool origin story.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because the story of replanting a weed. Who replants the weed?
Right.
Yeah.
Diane, do we have any more questions? Oh, I see one in the Q&A. Are we seeing just one generation here in New Hampshire before they head south, or more than one generation?
So we're probably going to see more than one generation, because the one that I saw, the two, I've seen two so far, they're probably the second generation. And so those butterflies are going to go around, they're going to lay eggs. Those butterflies will die. The caterpillars that hatch from that will form chrysalis. We'll have new butterflies from that in about a month or so, so July. And then they'll go through the life cycle again. More new butterflies in August. There might be a fifth generation too, you know, it all depends. But it's, yeah, we're going to see at least a couple more generations. Yep.
So, Donna, just a couple more quick questions. Do wild turkeys eat the caterpillars? Someone wants to know if they want to block off their milkweeds.
I believe they do, because last summer I had a bunch of caterpillars on milkweed. I had established a new milkweed patch with a lot of swamp milkweed out in my meadow. And I had all these caterpillars all over the milkweed. And one day I looked out the window and there were a bunch of turkeys out there, and I went out and the caterpillars were gone. And so I think that they did eat them. And I, you know, usually when you see turkeys, you see a lot at once. And, you know, like I said, they're going to take a bite and go, yuck, I'm not going to eat that again. But if there were 20 turkeys and there were 10 caterpillars, they could have all been wiped out by those turkeys, right? So I believe that they will eat them. So if you can rope it off, that would be a good idea.
Oh, that's great information. And one other, do you know where you can purchase swamp milkweed?
Yeah, you know, most seed catalogs sell it now. You can get it at any of your seed stores, Agway, Blue Seal, you know, anyone that sells seeds. The name you're looking for, read the scientific name. Asclepias incarnata is the swamp milkweed. It may be swamp milkweed, it may be rose milkweed. Sometimes they give them fancy names like Cinderella or Irresistible. You know, there's a lot of marketing that goes on, you know, so you may find different names. So Asclepias incarnata is what you're looking for. And I give away milkweed seed from here. I'm out of milkweed seed until our Monarch Festival. I've given away all that I had from last fall. But we should have more in the fall. I just give it away.
Thanks, Donna. I really appreciate your presentation and sharing with us. And Mark, are you up? And did you want to wrap us up?
Sure. Thanks everybody for joining us. We're going to be taking a short break in the webinar series. I think our next one is near the end of July. So again, thank you for your interest in the program. We'll have a follow-up email with some of the links that I've shared in the chat tonight, including webinar feedback form, where to register for more talks, our unveiling of the demonstration pollinator virtual tour, and of course, Donna's website, Petals and the Pines. Petals in the Pines.
Petalsinthepines.com is the website. Yep.
Cool. Thanks, Donna. And thanks everyone again for joining us, and for Diane for organizing it, and of course, Donna Miller. Really appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
And Donna, just to make sure I share lots of really wonderful comments about what a great presentation. So
Great.
Thank you from us.
Thank you. Come out and see us this summer.